Don Alejo Garza Tamez was born in July 1933 in Allende, Nuevo Leon, a town in northern Mexico. Don Alejo's family ran a sawmill, and he was raised learning the trade and slowly expanding his property, eventually buying a ranch. But in 2010, Don Alejo's ranch had the misfortune of existing in an area that would be a great checkpoint for the drug trade, thus drawing the attention of the Los Zetas gang. The Los Zetas are a cartel gang known for, they were not nice people. They were a former Mexican military that was trained to be a task force against the cartels, but then they realized they could make a lot more money by joining the drug trade, so that leads us to where we are today. On the 13th of November 2010, the cartel approached Don Alejo and asked him very nicely and not at all threateningly to vacate the premises in 24 hours in a real estate deal in which they would pay nothing in exchange for getting to live another day. Honestly, not the worst real estate offer I've heard of. Pretty generous. I would have taken it. But Don Alejo was a principled old man, 77 years old and the absolute pinnacle of humanity. This man hit him with the "I'll be waiting," and then the cartel just left and prepared to come back with backup. Don Alejo calmly grabbed his collection of guns and set them up at each window of the house. Within 24 hours, the cartel arrived. Don Alejo told them to leave, and they shot at him. So immediately he shot the two closest gangsters and the firefight commenced. The cartel began opening fire on Don Alejo's house, shooting at the window that he fired from, except that he had already moved to another window and shot two more gangsters dead. And as they shifted to that window, he was already gone, moving from window to window. Eventually, the cartel got sick of it and kicked open the door, only to see him there, guns in hand. They were wounded but not killed. The cartel decided enough was enough, and they started using just grenades on Don Alejo's house. After blowing up a bunch of stuff, they retreated before the military could arrive. And about an hour later, the military did show up, and they found the aftermath of the firefight. Over 900 bullets were fired into Don Alejo's house, and multiple just complete craters from grenades were found. Sadly, the man was found dead in his bathroom, rifle still pointing to the door as he succumbed to the bullet wounds he received during the firefight. But still, he's an absolute legend. I don't usually cover recent stuff, but this was just too good. Sempronius Densis. The story of Sempronius Densis is less a story about him and more a story about Rome during a period of time in which Rome was at its most Roman, if you get what I mean. It was the year 69 AD. This wasn't just funny due to the number, but also that Rome decided to go through 4 emperors in a single year: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. To begin with, I think it's safe to say that most people probably have a grasp of how Nero was as an emperor. He was psychotic and unhinged, he did some weird stuff involved killing his wife and replacing her with a dude that looked like her, and that's just one of the many, many stories of Nero's unhingedness. I could go through tons of stories about Nero, but all you really need to know is that he was hated by most of Rome by the time he was dethroned. And the first person to take his place was a silly little guy named Galba. Galba's first action as the self-proclaimed emperor was to march on Rome to claim his throne, as Galba was nowhere near Rome when Nero died. When Galba reached Rome, he had every soldier in the Roman garrison, unarmed or otherwise, killed, which immediately did not make him very popular. Otho, a governor at the time, who had sided with Galba, began to see that he was slowly losing favor by making more and more drastic mistakes. His fall was imminent, and Galba was the most unpopular with the military, while Otho was really popular after befriending many of the Praetorian Guards over the years, even going as far as to settle one of their debts with his own money. Eventually, Otho knew his time had come, and so with the help of the Praetorian Guard and some other fed-up Romans, he marched on Rome, causing a riot to break out. Galba and his heir went out into the crowd to try and reassure them and calm them down, and he was surrounded by guards. But when the guards saw Otho and his militia making their way through the crowd, every single one of them abandoned Galba. All except one. Yup, that's right, 7 paragraphs in, and I'm now bringing up Sempronius Densis. He's incredibly uninteresting as a person, but his final act here is just absolutely legendary. Sempronius refused to allow the militia to pass, and he held his ground against the soldiers who all wanted to kill Galba. Sempronius stood alone and defended Galba to the end. Unfortunately, we have no idea how long he fought for, or if he even killed anyone at all. But goddamn was he brave. He was noted and remembered for this act of valor, despite his idea to sacrifice himself for a pretty mid-emperor, all things considered. Granted, Galba didn't even serve a year. Pretty unfortunate, but hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. Okay, this next one is completely insane. We're talking about Vito Bertoldo. So this guy was a soldier in World War II. He was 25 when Pearl Harbor happened, and he decided to join the military despite his poor eyesight disqualifying him from the draft. His eyesight made him unable to be put into combat roles, but after requesting a transfer from his current job as a military police, he was given the role of a cook on the front lines in France. And while at a command post, he was volunteered as a guard. It was there when he noticed a group of Germans approaching off in the distance. And so he ran out into the streets with his gun and set himself up as the sole defensive line. For the next half a day, he stood fighting off the approach by himself while being shot at with everything from pistols to tanks. Yep, that's right. Tanks. Plural. As in for 12 hours, this dude stood out in the open with his guns, fighting off soldiers and multiple tanks who were shelling the area around him with 8mm guns. You know, the guns designed to take down airplanes and other tanks. All those guns firing at a single guy. Just had to hammer home how impressive that is. After the 12 hours passed, Vito ran back inside the command post and took cover behind a table with his machine gun. From there, he fired through a window to hit oncoming enemies. But then one of the tanks shot a shell into the room which sent him flying. But this dude was hacking or something because he got back up and picked up his gun as 2 APCs in a tank rolled up on him. He waited for an opening before peeking out the window again and firing as the soldiers jumped out of the APCs and the tank fired at him. It's said that he mowed down 20 combatants here alone. Much later, the command post was finally changed to another building as the tanks just kept pummeling the area. Vito stayed behind to cover everyone and remained watching their flank for the entire night. The morning after, he swapped over to a different building, the command post of a different battalion, and spent the next 24 hours defending that area. So, to recap, he's already been out for 24 hours straight fighting and dodging tanks. You think it's bad having to wake up early for school, and imagine how much infinitely more tired you'd be in this guy's shoes. Vito then fought off a tank, 2 heavy artillery guns, and 15 German infantry. It's said that the mobile artillery gun, which is more or less a tank, basically stuffed its barrel into the building that Vito was in and fired, sending him to the ground and messing up his allies. Then a team of friendly bazookas set the artillery truck on fire as Vito stood up and shot the people operating the flaming vehicle. Just such an insane guy. Then someone in charge finally got the bright idea to evacuate at night. But before they could put the plan to work, another assault started with ranged artillery and more tanks. So Vito's going on 48 hours of no sleep, and he begins fighting the attackers with white phosphorus grenades, which made them stop advancing, because if you know anything about white phosphorus, it's that you don't want to be anywhere near it. So the attacking soldiers made the smart decision to not walk into the white fog of death. So Vito holds the angle with his gun, and a tank shot at his location, sending him flying as it destroys his gun. But Vito still got back up and grabbed a new gun and fought to cover the withdrawal of his comrades again. And finally, after all this happens, he makes his way out, the last one to leave. I'm speechless.